Hey guys, one of my most anticipated movies of 2021 was The Suicide Squad. And after watching it, I can tell you that I really liked it. And I think one of the main reasons I did was because I watched David Ayer's Suicide Squad last week. So it's easy for me to say this latest reboot quill is a masterpiece compared to the version released in 2016. So in this video, I'm gonna cover as many reasons as possible why The Suicide Squad or The Suicide Squad or
Tehi Suicide Squad
is much better than 2016 Suicide Squad, simple as that. But before I start comparing, let me just say a couple of things about the 2016 Oscar-winning Suicide Squad. I was so excited to see that movie. A lot of you would probably remember how awesome the trailers were in 2016. I was so hyped at the time that I spent £16.50 to watch the movie on the biggest screen in the UK, which was the BFI IMAX in Waterloo, London. Needless to say, I was very disappointed, but here's the thing. I am not angry at the film or the filmmakers. It's far from the worst movie I've ever seen. In fact, I actually do like some things about the movie. Margot Robbie is amazing as Harley Quinn. I think Viola Davis is awesome as always. I like the fact that I get to see all these obscure characters on the big screen. And yes, the makeup and hairstyling was Oscar-worthy. Also, I really like the writer-director David Ayer. He is a good filmmaker. If you guys haven't seen Fury and End of Watch, please go and see it. It's understandable that 2016 Suicide Squad turned out the way it did given all its production issues. So just because I'll be critiquing the 2016 Suicide Squad pretty harshly, it's simply my honest opinion on the film itself. And I still appreciate the work of the filmmakers. With that said, let's look at how The Suicide Squad from 2021 is just better.
It was a really good plan too.
Where do I begin? Let's start with characters. Now I'll admit, I like the idea for the characters in 2016 Suicide Squad. The trailers made them look super cool. But then the movie just does an info dump about each character through incredibly lazy exposition plus this blink and you'll miss it text on the screen. I mean, you can't just do this and expect an audience to get invested in these characters. The movie attempts to give some of these characters backstories, and I like the concept of some of these backstories, like Deadshot's relationship with his daughter and the stuff with El Diablo and his family. But I just found most of these backstories very poorly executed.
Evolution took a step backwards with this one.
Or very superficial.
This is Katana! She's got my back!
Or very out of place. We'll get back to this one later. But basically, the film is hampered by the fact that none of these characters, save Harley Quinn, really get enough meaningful breathing room to be good characters. I mean, this is even considering the bar scene, which was actually meant for character development. I just didn't buy it, guys, and don't even get me started on this. On paper, most of the characters from The Suicide Squad are not as interesting. They're super obscure people with very weird abilities and quirks. So I think it's extra impressive how James Gunn brings so much heart into these characters. As with the last movie, Harley Quinn and Amanda Waller are great, but it's really the backstories of Bloodsport, played by Idris Elba, as well as Ratcatcher 2, played by Daniela Melchior, that absolutely won me over in this film. Their arcs are the most fleshed out, the most heartfelt, and the ones that gave us the most catharsis by the end of the film. Even when we don't get full backstories of certain characters in the movie, the clever use of dialogue helps us understand who these people are, what they want. In contrast to 2016 Suicide Squad, I think James Gunn managed to humanize some of these anti-heroes way more than I expected. I was way more invested in these types of characters, especially because we're treated to some conflicts of ideologies in the team, which makes for some pretty good interactions in the film. And even if we don't get deep characterization for some of our squad members, then James Gunn essentially writes them as a source of the many comedic moments in the film. Of course, there's still a lot of exposition. I think that kind of thing is impossible to avoid in a movie like this, but I'm thankful that it wasn't an info dump, and the majority of it was presented in an effective way considering how stacked the cast is. Now, I'm talking a lot about character because most of the time, character drives story. And I thought the story for the 2016 Suicide Squad was Meh. I mean, the plot isn't offensive for a tentpole, stuff your mouth with popcorn type of movie. The story here is about the Suicide Squad, a ragtag bunch of criminals forced together by the US government to perform secret missions. But the reason they're called into action in the first place was because a member of said squad goes rogue and becomes the villain of the movie. Yeah. Then you have this weird Joker side plot which really feels like a lot of it was cut out, and that makes it feel like it belongs in a different movie altogether. I mean, all the Joker stuff was really just there to show Jared Leto as the Joker and to beef up Harley Quinn's backstory, and that to me isn't the best justification for a side plot. The whole movie is reduced to a lot of forgettable talking, followed by forgettable action sequences with a bunch of faceless bad guys, followed by forgettable traveling from A to B, until eventually we have to beat the final boss and stop the magical beam in the sky. We've seen all of that before, but done better. Now let's be fair, it's a well-known fact that David Ayer only had 6 weeks to write the script, which resulted in a mad rush to finish the story. After that, Warner Brothers decided to change a lot of stuff, so it definitely isn't Ayer's fault, and we know that his vision was completely different from the end product. At this point, you already know that I'm gonna tell you that this Suicide Squad has a much better story, for 3 reasons. Without any spoilers, reason number 1 is that the mission is much more significant and relevant this time round. You understand why Amanda Waller had to put this mission together in the first place, and it actually manages to raise some pretty interesting questions around ethics. Reason number 2 is that the way the story is laid out demonstrates some quality writing and directing. James Gunn does a great job in weaving together comedy, extreme gore, but also quieter, heartfelt moments into the narrative, while also doing some non-linear storytelling in a very coherent way. I was never bored once, and this is going to be the closest thing to a spoiler, but I think the film establishes very quickly why it's called The Suicide Squad. And reason number 3 is something we've already discussed, the fact that I cared a lot more for these group of characters, so I was always worried if they could achieve their objective, and how each character's individual story arc would end alongside the main storyline, something that I never felt in the 2016 original. Now let's talk about editing and the wider point of film structure. I think we can all agree that the theatrical cut of 2016 Suicide Squad is a mess. I mean, you only need to watch the incredibly jarring first 10 minutes to conclude this. Although the whole movie is filled with bad editing decisions, you can tell in these opening minutes especially that the people who edited this movie cut it up like some music video. I'm saying that honestly and deliberately, since the theatrical cut was done by the team that made the music video trailer. So you've got these edits that feel out of place because there's a music change every 2 seconds, and then you've got scenes that feel like they belong in different parts of the movie. I'll always remember this scene in the subway station because of how confusing and random it was. You don't really have the faintest idea what these two are doing and how they got there until much later in the movie, and it wasn't a terribly good reveal either. And then there are even simple edits within scenes that don't make any sense. I mean, when this monster jumps down to fight Captain Boomerang, we immediately cut away to this other fight. And then we cut back to the first monster. I mean, couldn't we just have joined those 2 shots together? Because it kind of should be happening in real time. Anyways, there are more examples of bad editing, but let's talk about how The Suicide Squad does this better. Okay, I will admit, there were cuts in this film where I got some bad flashbacks of 2016 Suicide Squad. There are some sudden song changes, there are some awkward scene changes that I wasn't sure about, but all in all, the Suicide Squad is a good edit. All the moving parts fit together exactly as one would expect from any action film worth its salt. I think that's especially true because of the way the film deals with its non-linear structure. 2 things I like here. 1, the way information is sometimes delivered through very short flashbacks, but also sometimes through plain dialogue without flashbacks. I like that decisions were made to not cut away when the film could have easily done so. as was almost always the case with 2016 Suicide Squad. And circling back to character, it gives a lot more breathing room for the squad members to manifest themselves as living, breathing characters. Secondly, there are several sections of the film that are told out of order, and this includes sections that happen at almost the same time. But I like that Gunn decided to cut each section as individual sequences instead of cross-cutting between two characters in different places. This allows for some pretty creative resolutions without taking us out of the film and never detracting from the enjoyment of the film in general. Editing is really important for so many reasons, and one of the major ones is that editing affects pacing, and specifically the expectations a film creates with pacing. Whether a film is a slow burn or a rapid-fire joyride, the one thing in a movie we tend to look for is consistency. And it's hard to describe 2016 Suicide Squad as consistent unless the word "not" is in the same sentence. As we already talked about, the movie opens with an incredibly quick-paced montage of our squad members. This in turn sets up the expectation that we're gonna see some high-octane action throughout the film. But the pacing very quickly falls off a cliff, and we're just treated to a bunch more talking and exposition. It's not that the movie becomes slow per se, but when you edit that fast in the beginning, slowing down immediately creates a vacuum of energy that I did not enjoy. At the 30-minute mark, we're still demonstrating the squad members' abilities, and it's only at 59 minutes, an hour into the movie and almost halfway through, that we see our very first fight scene where the action finally picks up again. That should tell you all you need to know about how structure affects pacing. There are many reasons James Gunn's Suicide Squad could suffer the same fate with pacing, and I've definitely spoken to some friends who have issues with pacing. But I thought the pacing was surprisingly good in the film. I was equally on the edge of my seat during the intense action scenes as well as the more expositional scenes. At no point did I feel the momentum of the film dropping. I mentioned the 2016 Suicide Squad scene where they're all in a bar, and here I thought the pace really slowed to a standstill. In the James Gunn version, the equivalent scene is arguably the one that takes place in a club. But because of the music, the extras, and the significance of the club in the story, the scene never felt slow, and so the pacing never wavered. I just have a few points left, so I'll quickly cover action, cinematography, and color in the same section. I found the action in 2016 Suicide Squad to be serviceable at best. Yes, there's shooting and killing, but other than the several helicopter crashes, I found the coverage to be very basic in terms of the fight scenes. The camera work is fine, but I honestly don't recall seeing anything too memorable in terms of angles and blocking, and half the time it's so dark and grimy that I can barely see anything that's happening. In stark contrast, James Gunn's Suicide Squad is bright, loud, and vibrant, with a lot of it taking place in the sun. I think the team effectively drew on influences from Cuba and Panama to build the fictional island of Puerto Maltese, and I think this style really jives with the colorful, crazy, and ridiculous nature of the squad itself. This greatly affects the action scenes, some of which I think are the best in the DCEU. There is one particular sequence involving Harley Quinn that I think defines the movie's identity. You can really feel James Gunn's influence on the action and the way these scenes are shot, with creative angles and quick pans and zooms that really keeps the energy flowing. I interpret this as evidence how an auteur's touch and creative freedom can be 100% taken advantage of in a film like this. Now, to be fair, I think one of the reasons behind James Gunn's success here is definitely the R rating, which allowed him to really let loose with cursing, and oh my god, I haven't even started on the violence. This is a really gory movie, guys, but I think it really services the insane, no-holds-barred nature of a squad of criminals literally being sent to their deaths. Finally, we'll talk about the music. Now, on their own, the songs from 2016 Suicide Squad are great. Bohemian Rhapsody, House of the Rising Sun, Spirit in the Sky, all very catchy. But other than Heathens, which I actually really like, I wonder if the songs really needed to be a list of greatest hits that we've heard in so many other shows and movies before. And it's not like the Guardians of the Galaxy movies where the songs are built into the story and it's often diegetic. This just felt very commercialized, as if it was meant to please the lowest common denominator. Definitely a subjective comment, but that's just how I feel. Because of the Guardians movies, I trust James Gunn when it comes to song choices, and he 1000% delivered in his song choices for The Suicide Squad. We could already tell it was going to be good when he featured Steely Dan and Grandson songs in the trailers, but the movie soundtrack is just a great collection of tracks that fit the scenes perfectly, from country to hip-hop to John Murphy's score. I think the music was a huge contributor to what gave this movie its soul. Again, no spoilers, but at the climax of the film, I got some major Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 vibes, and some may call that formulaic and even problematic. But if James Gunn uses cliches and tropes in The Suicide Squad, they are used for good reason. So if all of these points don't convince you that The Suicide Squad is worth watching, then I don't know what to tell you. Looking back, maybe this whole video was pointless because 2016 Suicide Squad set such a low bar to clear. Pretty much anything would have been an improvement. But with James Gunn and all the cast and crew, I think The Suicide Squad knocks it out of the park. Its crazy visuals and violence is complemented by a crazier bunch of characters, a fun story, and more than its fair share of heartwarming moments. And that, my friends, is why The Suicide Squad is just better. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching that video. I hope you enjoyed it. What did you think of The Suicide Squad? Let me know in the comments below. I will be back with a new video soon. So until next time, have a great week ahead, maximum hype, and I'll see you next time.